Welcome to the seventh module of the course Global Trade and Politics. We will be talking on trade development and inequality, trade development and inequality. And the module actually explores the complex intersection of trade, the development and inequality, focusing on structural imbalance that shape global trade dynamics. We will actually look into the liberalization impact on global south, and we may not be in the presentation, we may not be able to touch the north-south divide, but it's actually reflected in the notes, well explained. So we would see the special attention given to how trade affects individuals differently based on gender, race, ethnicity, and class, and encouraging a critical evaluation of the current study. And that is what our focus will be. So today we will actually focus on the global south. And when we talk about the global south, what do we actually mean, or where in the geographical location we section the global south, and we see the global south as one comprising of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean area. And the relationship between trade and economic development is the global south. The relationship between the trade and economic development in the global south is both deeply consequential and persistently complex. So as globalization continues to shape international trade pattern, countries in these areas that I've listed find themselves navigating the promises and perils of integration into a global market, largely dominated by northern interests. When we talk about the global south, we have the colonial legacy and the structural economic dependency in such area. And for us to be able to talk about that, one cannot examine trade and development in the global south without acknowledging the colonial foundation or the bedrock of modern system. So during this period, we have the colonial period, and the global south region, this is actually the global south region. This is integrated as extractive peripheries, exporting raw materials and importing manufactured goods, entrenching monocultural exports dependence. So for this period, the global south region were integrated as extractive peripheries, and they have the major they perform exporting of raw materials and importing manufactured goods. And this is what the era of the period is characterized by. We also have the post-independence, whereby we talk about an inherited economy skewed towards primary commodity exports with limited diversification. So it talks about the countries inheriting economies skewed towards primary commodity exports with limited diversification. And the dependency theory argues on the underdevelopment is perpetuated by integration into a northern controlled global system. And however, the colonial legacy created fragile economic foundation and hinders domestic industrial growth, making economies vulnerable to external shocks. So it's created a form of a limited industrialization. And this is how the colonial legacy is characterized and the structural economic dependency in the global south. We also have to talk on the trade um, liberalization, where we talk about the SAP. Um, and when we talk about the SAP, it's actually in, in the 1980s and 1990s, many global South countries face severe debt crisis, prompting intervention by international financial institutions such as the likes of IMF and World Banks. And these institutions introduced the Structural Adjustment Program, which is SAPS. And this program actually um, helps in promoting trade liberalization, deregulation, and privatization due to debt crisis. So this is brought about because of the debt crisis that countries in the global south are facing at that point in time. So these financial institutions came together in order to bring about a aid in uh, from the debt crisis. And also, while SAP succeeded in integrating many countries into global markets, their outcomes were highly uneven, and that is why we have an uneven outcome. And while some Asian economies saw rapid industrial growth, many African and Latin American countries experienced deindustrialization, unemployment, and weakened states institution. So, despite bringing about such an intervention program, it's not evenly distributed. The outcome is uneven, and you can see that some of the countries in the African and Latin America, they experienced industrialization. There is unemployment and also weakened state institution. So it's criticism came in as per the SAP intervention that was um, carried out or employed, and critics argue that SAP undermined local industries by exposing them prematurely to global competition, which led to increased income inequality and commodity reliance. It actually led to increased income inequality and commodity reliance. And this was what actually happened in the late 20th century in the global south. And we said it's a time where many of the countries in the global south were in crisis of debt, and the intervention that could be brought about is the structural adjustment program. Also, we have the export-led growth and sectoral transformation in the global south. We see the successes and the constraints or challenges. And some countries in the global south have pursued export-led growth strategies with notable success. For example, the East and Southeast Asian had a success, and this East and Southeast Asian economic, particularly South Korea, Taiwan, the likes of Malaysia, and more recently, Vietnam, invested heavily in education, technology, and infrastructure to be able to boost the manufacturing exports. And their government maintained active industrial policies, supported strategic sectors, and fostered competitiveness, allowing for a climb up um, the global value chain from basic manufacturing to high-tech industry. And and that's the success aspect, um, more particular investment in the education, the technology and infrastructure which actually is brought about to be able to boost manufacturing exports. And as on it's without challenges. And we have that many African and Latin American countries lack institutional capacity and infrastructure. Um, we can see that some of the countries in Africa and America does not have the necessary institutional capacity and infrastructure to be able to attain this, just like these countries that we mentioned have been able to in the Southeastern Asian economies. Also, there is saturated global market, and WTO will limit new entrants and infant industry protection. So the saturated global markets and the rule that was brought about by the WTO, World Trade Organization, is limiting new entrants and infant industry protection. So, and that's a critical challenge. And lastly, the rule of global trade enforced by institutions like WTO. Yes, okay, it's still the same thing. So often limit the ability of developing countries to protect infant industries or implement subsidies critical for industrial growth. We also have the commodity dependence and term of trade in the global south. When we talk about commodity dependence, a significant portion of the global south remains heavily dependent on primary commodity um, exports, such as the likes of oil, minerals, and agricultural products. While these exports generate foreign revenue, foreign exchange and revenue, they are prone to volatile international prices. That is, they are exposed to national economics to fiscal instability. It exposes national economies to fiscal instability and deteriorating terms of trade. And another thing under this is a challenge of agricultural subsidy. Further compounding the problem, agricultural subsidy in developed countries, and particularly the US and the European Union, which distorts global markets and undercuts farmers in the global south, impending rural development and food security. So this is coming under the global south, whereby we have significant parts of the global south heavily dependent on primary commodities. Like Nigeria now, we are heavily dependent on oil, and clamoring has been we are clamoring to actually switch also to agricultural products. So in this instance, we are getting dependent on primary commodity export. And the challenge of agricultural subsidy from the developed country is a challenge. It's actually a challenge for many farmers in the global south. Also, in the global south, we have a trade and poverty reduction, trade and poverty reduction. And when we talk about the trade and poverty reduction, it comes with a mixed outcome. And the first is that trade has potential for growth. Trade can reduce poverty. That's very right. By generating income, creating employment, and enhancing access to goods and specialization, markets access, and foreign investment are the ones key concept, key things that actually drive growth. Also, we can see that trade sometimes aggravates inequality, and this is the negative side we can see of trade. And without inclusive policy, trade benefits may disproportionately favor large firms and urban areas, and leaving rural communities in informal workers and women behind, and we are beginning to see inequality, racism, and then gender inequality in any way. And we are beginning to see that coming forth in trade. And also, there is actually need for complementary policies in trade. Effective policy alleviation requires trade to be complemented by investment in education, in infrastructure, health, and social safety, and also to support the small and medium scale enterprise. And lastly, about the market access, there is need for reducing trade costs through improved infrastructure and streamlined custom procedure, which is key to enabling poor producers to participate in the global market. So there is need for market access for the poor producers. There is need for them to be able to have access to the market, and this is done by reducing trade costs. And when this is done, the poor producer will be able to have access to the market. The gender, race, and inequality in global trade. When we talk about the gender, race, and inequality in the global trade, we are talking about the common issue that happens in the world. And about for gender inequality, women are concentrated in low wage, low skill job, and in labor intensive sector, facing limited access to credit, training, and market information. So gender responsive policies are essential in this aspect. So in global trade, we talk about the likes of gender inequality. Women are actually at the um, um, receiving end of this. They have a negative. This is having a negative impact on them to an extent, whereby they are belittled, and they sometimes get low wage, and compared to how men are being paid and how men receive the recognition they ought to. And that is why policy is needed. Gender responsive policy is very essential. Also, for racial disparities, racial and ethnic minority face systemic barriers, including historical exclusion and discrimination. So trade projects can displace indigenous population without adequate composition. Um, it can actually displace indigenous populations without adequate compensation. So there is need for these systemic barriers to be looked into, the likes in terms of the racial and ethnic minorities which are facing these barriers. So it is very, very important. And lastly, the intersectional challenge and inequality are intersectional with gender, race, class, and geography compounding disadvantage. So structural reforms are needed to address power imbalance and protect labor rights. So in order to deal with the inequalities that are intersectional with gender, race, class, and geographical compounding disadvantages, uh, there is need for reform, and there is need to address the imbalances and protect labor rights. In conclusion, to foster inclusive and sustainable development, the Global South must diversify economy, invest in innovation and education, and enhance infrastructure, advocating for fairer global trade rule, and integrating sustainability and equity into policies are crucial. So this actually includes greater flexibility in obligations and stronger enforcement of special and differential treatment. Also, this there should be a knowledge sharing for equitable development trajectory, and there is need to ensure ethical supply chain, living wage, and environmental sustainability, making sure to promote fair trading. And there is need to support regional integration initiative can be brought up to build markets and bargaining power. And lastly, there is need to invest in capacity, that is enhancement of infrastructure, um, education, and innovation for competitiveness. Thank you.